Okay, guys, so we'll get started for tonight. I'm only going to speak for 1 minute. I'm on dinner cooking duty, so I'm just going to listen in the background. Yeah, we've obviously been working with Sam and Jules as athletes. Many of you will know them, so what I'm about to say is probably pointless, but we've been working with them as athletes for quite a few years now, and they're both doctors at Liverpool John Moores, sports science related, and they have since branched out into being qualified nutritionalists, just obviously with their own interests in nutrition, especially in the field that we're going to talk about tonight. So, really close links with these guys, and they've worked so closely alongside us for years. They have like a real deep understanding of how we work as coaches with athletes. And I think it probably influences, then the way they go on to work with whoever they're working with, whether it's a total try client or an external client. But we've recently just done like an evening like this with all the coaches, and it just seemed appropriate to do something for all the athletes to listen to what I thought was a really good way of approaching nutrition and coaching together that these guys can offer. And then also, I'm sure it'll allow you guys some chance to either get to know them and contact them afterwards or ask some questions at the end of this, which I'm sure they'll give you a chance to do. So I won't talk anymore. I'll just hand you over. I don't know which one of you is going first. Looks like Sam's not on mute. Yeah. So, right, I'll leave you to it, guys.
Thanks, Phil. Evening, everyone. So I suppose essentially what we want to do tonight over the next hour is just, I guess, give you an idea of what we're offering from a nutritional perspective, but also, put it into a bit of context in the way that we work and the principles we work to, and then outline how this potentially fits into the season now that we're, races look like they're on the horizon, thankfully. And I think now is really the perfect time to be thinking about this. And we'll kind of come on to that a little bit later on and how it fits leading into the season. So I suppose just quickly, and Phil's given us a bit of an introduction, but I'll just, briefly, for those that don't know us, let you know who we are. So as Phil said, we're both lecturers in sort of nutrition and health and exercise metabolism at Liverpool John Moores University. We're both registered nutritionists, and this is the sort of business side of the thing that we're coming to now. And I suppose the reason that we've created this business and branched out, I suppose, in this way is that we've got a lot of experience in conducting nutrition, exercise research, and also then teaching that to our students. And we've also obviously got, a passion and an interest in triathlon. So, 5 to 10 years experience as age group triathletes between us. And I suppose, the key things that we wanted to take from our research and implement into into the business is we wanted everything to be research informed. So that's obviously coming from our research background. The key thing for us about nutrition is that it's very individual. So it's not that we, will offer a set nutrition plan, for example. It needs to be very individual to the needs of the person. We see that through our research. Not everyone responds in the same way. So that's what we want to adopt, that principle here. And then also, we want to be able to provide some education as well. So it's not that you're just, we're just conducting and, telling you every little detail of what to do, but also understanding why you're doing it. So it's a lot like the relationship you have with your coach as well, where you're able to understand the particular sessions that you're doing. And this is the same, principle that we're working to here from a business perspective. So yeah, I suppose as a result, we've developed this nutrition business, Total Endurance Nutrition, and this is our strapline, if you like, of research informed sports nutrition coaching, and then advice ultimately for particularly targeted at endurance athletes. And one of the key things, and this will become apparent, I suppose, as we talk tonight, is that when we think about all the people that support us in achieving our goals from a race perspective, then it's not just a coach that is an important part of that. It's you might go for swim analysis, you might have a bike fit. Family is really important in this regard. Psychology, sports massage, there's a whole group of people. And from a nutrition perspective, that's we're just contributing to that group effort. We can't, it's an individual sport, but ultimately there's a lot of people contributing to your optimal performance in triathlon or in any endurance sport that you choose to do. So I suppose that's just a quick introduction and to the business and who we are. And probably the main topic for tonight is, we had that title at the start, a roadmap to triathlon racing and a nutritional roadmap. And one of the principles that we really work to here is this idea of optimizing energy or carbohydrate availability, and how that can then influence your training response, get the most from your training, but then also that's going to lead to an enhanced race performance ultimately. And this is the key principle that underlies everything that we do. And as I'll talk about, this is we've done a lot of research on this area over the last few years. So what do we mean by energy or carbohydrate availability, and then what are the benefits to health and performance? So we'll just touch on that a little bit now. So some of the benefits, are really these things. So if we can optimize energy availability or carbohydrate availability, then we're able to support, effective training and quality of training, which is, I'm sure your coaches keep talking to about this quality of training, not just quantity. We can, using this approach, we can also promote proper and appropriate recovery so that you recover well, so you can then hit the next session hard, for example, and get, again, the most benefit from that session. And this approach, and this is some of the work that we've kind of done in the last few years at Liverpool, is understand how managing energy and carbohydrate availability can also enhance the adaptation to the training we're doing. So we can really, you can see that this is really starting to get the most and benefit from the training that we're actually doing. And then another concept that we'll kind of come on to a little bit later is how this strategy can be used to firstly reduce weight, which is, we're all, 90% of the people that we're working with want to lose a little bit of weight so we can get down to, our race weight, if we like. But the important thing about, doing that in a careful way is that we don't want to compromise training quality, and this energy availability and carbohydrate availability approach is critical in doing that. And then ultimately we can, through that, through reducing weight, we can also optimize body composition as well. So we can start to lose, the fat rather than the muscle, for example, that we, obviously is important for generating power and such. So, when we think about carbohydrate availability, we've got, a certain amount of carbohydrate when we're, well fed in the body already, and we store about 100 grams of that in the liver, and then maybe about 500 grams in the muscle as glycogen, and that's our stored carbohydrate essentially. We can also, of course, ingest carbohydrate whilst we're training, whilst we're racing, before, after, during. And when we talk about carbohydrate availability, what we're really talking about here is the combination of ingested carbohydrate plus the stored carbohydrate, and that determines our overall carbohydrate availability. And that's important because we can manipulate either the amount of carbohydrate we take on board before, during, after training, and that's then going to influence our stored carbohydrate levels, and we can also manipulate those before or after a training session as well to manipulate overall carbohydrate availability. But we've got to do that in a really careful way, because ultimately the aim for any of our training sessions is we want to ensure that we complete the session at the desired intensity and duration. And, you know, when we're thinking about carbohydrate dependent types of sessions, we're thinking about the harder training sessions. So we need to make sure that carbohydrate availability around those sessions is high, and then we can manipulate carbohydrate availability and as a result energy availability around some of the more lower key sessions. And that's, but we have to do that in a careful way. And we're talking about manipulating carbohydrate availability, and in many ways we actually do this naturally anyway, without really thinking about it. You know, so we might, you know, many of us might have got on the bike this morning at 6:30 with Claire, having not had any food, and we've done some fasted training, for example. So that's one form of manipulating carbohydrate availability to change the training response. You know, the focus is then on fat burning. There's other things that you may have heard of or read about, such as sleep low, where we do a bout of hard exercise in the evening. We then don't refeed with a huge amount of carbohydrate, and then we perform a bout of exercise in the morning without having had breakfast. And as a result, we've manipulated our muscle glycogen stores, so we start that bout of exercise the next day, that training bout, in a kind of glycogen depleted state. And then again, many of us will do this where we perform 2 sessions a day. You know, it might be a hard morning session and then an afternoon session. If we don't replete or refeed with much carbohydrate in between, then that is, you know, another way of manipulating carbohydrate or energy availability. The key thing here is that if we don't carefully plan this, though, then it's going to impact the quality of the training and probably ultimately the subsequent training sessions. So you might not realize the damage, I suppose, that you're doing in the first instance, but it's 2 or 3 days later that it kind of catches up with you. And that's why we need to carefully manage this carbohydrate availability. So how does it actually work? Well, as I've said, we've done a lot of research on this topic over the last sort of 6 or 7 years at Liverpool John Moores University. So we've done a lot of studies where we have participants come to the lab, and we take some studies where we take bits of muscle out of people. It's not that painful. I've had it done several times to myself, and you can then exercise, and we can look at changes in muscle glycogen levels. You know, we can do different types of training and then measure changes in the glycogen in the muscle, for example, in response to these different nutritional strategies. And we've now got quite a few studies. This is just a quick selection of those studies, but it's just to illustrate the point that we've, you know, this is something that we've been working on from a research perspective for probably 6 or 7 years now within the group at Liverpool John Moores University. So we've got a good understanding of this principle and why, you know, we've got evidence to support why it will work in this applied context when we start working with athletes. And the important thing here is that the work we've done is starting to inform these carbohydrate periodization strategies. So you may have heard of that periodization term, I suppose, before. So, you know, very basically, how does this concept actually work in supporting or enhancing the adaptation to training? Well, when we do exercise, you know, very broadly speaking, when we exercise and we train for a period of time, as we are doing now, then our muscles adapt. And one of the adaptations that happens in our muscles, one of the changes, is we get an increase in the number of mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria are incredibly important because they are responsible for oxidation of carbohydrate and also fat as well. So if we've got more mitochondria in the muscle, then we're better able to oxidize carbohydrates and fats. When we manipulate carbohydrates or energy availability, then what we can do is actually enhance the adaptation or the adaptive response to the training that we're doing. So if we do that in a carefully managed way, and we exercise with low carbohydrate availability, for example, in certain sessions, then we can increase the mitochondria to a greater extent. So as a result, we've got a greater capacity to burn fat when we're exercising at low intensities and use carbohydrate efficiently when we're exercising at higher exercise intensities. So, if we put that into layman's terms, what we're really doing is making our muscles are adapting to have become better machines. Ultimately, the machinery within the muscle is, improving from this rusty drivetrain, if we like, to something like sparkly that we can see here from ceramic speed. And the ultimate aim with that is that we can then support metabolic efficiency. And what we mean by metabolic efficiency is that capacity to use the fats and carbohydrates that we've got in the body and that we're putting into the body during exercise or after exercise. We can use those efficiently in the most appropriate way, ultimately. Now that's really important, and particularly when we think about performance in Ironman and also 70.3 racing, because there's been some research that shows that your ability to burn fat is closely linked to how you perform in an Ironman. So by doing low carbohydrate training or specific sessions of low carbohydrate training, then this is a means to actually improve our maximum fat oxidation capacity. So quite clearly, if we then want to target middle to long distance racing, improving that capacity to burn fat is going to be linked to performance and our capacity to complete that race in a faster time than maybe what we would hope. So using carbohydrate and manipulating energy availability appropriately in certain sessions can actually lead to this type of adaptation. So you can start to see the benefits to performance when we're thinking about middle to long distance racing. Of course, as I've kind of alluded to a couple of times, we need to do this very carefully, because we're not just interested in improving our maximum fat oxidation capacity, because if we were, then we would only train at very low intensities, and we wouldn't have any high end speed or anything like that. So when we think about the types of training we're doing, low carb training, high carb training, low energy training are they're worked into or we can work that into a training plan very carefully so you maximize what you're getting from those training sessions. So there's some things that we should always think about really and very basics are training intensity and duration, and then it's the overall exercise stress, which is a combination of the two really. And those two factors or three factors are what we really consider when we're implementing this, or when we need to implement this strategy, because we don't want to impact the sessions or the session quality or the block quality. So this is what we're getting, the point we're trying to make here is that when you implement this type of thing, it needs to be carefully considered, and that's in the context of the aims of the session that you're about to do, and then the subsequent sessions on the next few days, and then also the wider training block as well. So when Phil said, I think we're in a good position really, because we've been involved in TTT for a few years now. So we understand how each of the blocks are working, for example, and what the aims of the blocks are. So we can plan that quite effectively. So what does that, I suppose, look like in practice in some ways, and how we can manipulate carbohydrate availability? Well, one of the ways we can do that is, if this is a I don't know, 36 hours in the life of, and we're looking at carbohydrate availability here, and we can manipulate carbohydrate availability with nutrition, of course. And so what we might do is we might do this, I don't know, this run in the morning, 7 times 4 minutes at half marathon pace. Obviously, our carbohydrate in our body is going to be reduced as a result of that. We then, would feed maybe a moderate amount of carbohydrate because in the afternoon we've just got an easy run to do. We can do that. We get a little decrease in carbohydrate again, and then we don't feed too much after that. So we're starting with like half our stores overnight, and then during this 3-hour ride the next day, which is just an easy endurance ride, we could do that in a low carbohydrate state ultimately, and then maybe feed towards the back end of that ride, just so we don't dig ourselves a massive hole, and maintain the quality towards the end of the back end of that ride. But ultimately what we're trying to do is create these transient periods of low carbohydrate availability at the appropriate times to ensure training quality is good, but also maximize the adaptations that we're getting to the training. And one of the things that's quite nice here is that if we manipulate carbohydrate availability, what we can actually do is at the same time manipulate energy availability. And if we plot these, they track quite closely, because we can keep the protein, keep the fat, which are also contributing to energy availability. We can keep those at a kind of standard rate, if you like, and alter the carbohydrate on a sliding scale in many ways, and that then alters energy availability. Now that's really important, because one of the outcomes and one of the benefits to this type of training is that we can effectively then lose weight, get ourselves down to race weight in a careful manner, and at the same time optimize our body composition. So the weight that we're losing is predominantly fat rather than losing a lot of muscle. Now, if we look at, this might be a typical week, and on this figure here, we've got, this is energy over each day, and we've got energy intake in the blue bars, and then in the orange bars, energy expenditure from the training we're doing. And we can see on some days that our energy intake matches our energy expenditure, and then on other days, our energy expenditure is actually a little bit higher than our intake from our food. And on the days when our expenditure might be a little bit higher than our intake, then they might be what we call lower carbohydrate requirement days. So they might be our easy endurance days, for example, or there might be specific sessions on those days that require less carbohydrates. And so then when we look at energy balance, which is essentially intake minus expenditure, so what we're taking in food versus what we're burning, then we can start to see that on specific days during the week where our carbohydrate requirements of the sessions that we're doing are lower, we can start to create a bit of a deficit. And then over a week, it might come out at something like 2,000 calorie deficit or something. The key thing here is that we've done this in a very careful manner, and we're not, doing 4 or 5 days in a deficit back to back, because that's when issues start to arise. So let me just stress 2 things at this point. So this is not a low carb diet that we're suggesting for everyone here, and it's also not a low energy diet. So it's not about cutting calories all the time and every single day. The key here is that we're trying to provide the body with the appropriate energy, and really what we mean by that is carbohydrate at the appropriate time, so that we can get, that it supports the training that we're actually going to be doing. So when the carbohydrate requirements are high, that's when we can, feed the carbohydrate, provide the carbohydrate, or ensure the carbohydrate is available. Jules?
Yeah. Okay, so sorry, Sam. So I'm just going to sort of carry on from Sam now and introduce you to some of the ways that we work with athletes to support them through using these principles that Sam mentioned initially. So the first is via one of our nutrition coaching packages. So this is the Total Nutrition Coaching Package. And the aim that we have with this is to provide athletes with guidance on some basic changes and ways to ingrain good habits. And not only that, but ensure that that is, you know, optimized around the key sessions. So we find that many athletes often know what they need to do from a nutrition perspective, or, you know, have a pretty good idea. But what they're looking for from a package like this is, you know, basic guidance, some accountability, and that's what we can offer with this package. So, you know, we've really tried to make sure that the price point here of £65 a month makes this package really accessible for people, and that's something that was really important for us. So we don't think that nutrition coaching, nutrition support should only be available for, you know, certain people, certain athletes. You know, we want to support everyone. We all do triathlon, you know, to better ourselves and to compete with ourselves ultimately. You know, we've got a whole range of abilities, a whole range of athletes, and a whole reason that we do triathlon or these various endurance events. So, you know, we want to be able to offer this support to as many athletes as we can. So yeah, when it comes to the accountability aspect, we find that, you know, whilst athletes might know what it is that they need to eat, they often find themselves at, you know, a crossroads like this. And, you know, much like you have a coach overlooking your training, and, you know, you ultimately want to see that session go green. When it comes to the nutrition coaching, you know, having someone that, you know, can advise you at the right times and support you to make good decisions, or perhaps suggest more appropriate options at various times. And that's where that accountability aspect really comes in. And the way that we deliver our nutrition coaching, so regardless of the package you're on, the way that this is delivered, if athletes have it available to them, is via Training Peaks. And the reason for that is that we see, as Sam mentioned, that supporting an athlete is very much a group effort, and by delivering this information into Training Peaks, it kind of supports this holistic approach for an athlete. And it means that your coach and you can also see you know, the nutrition information that you're getting, and obviously the nutrition support is linked to the sessions, and it just means that everyone can kind of see that bigger picture and understand what's going on. So this is just an example here from an athlete who, in the very early stages of working with us on this total nutrition coaching package, had the aim of some weight loss. That was their aim. And one of the initial things that we wanted to support them with was introducing more fruit and veg into their diet. So what we do with the nutrition, with this total coaching package, is aim to ingrain some good habits, and we do that on a weekly or over a couple of weeks as people begin to ingrain these habits and hit these goals and things. So what you'll see is a typical week in Training Peaks, and you'll see that there are some additional sessions, if you like, dropped in, and that's the nutrition support that's available. So alongside the guidance that this athlete's been given, there's some recipe suggestions. So an example there is the carrot and beetroot salad. There's the vegetable and bean soup in there as well. And you'll see that there's a session on Saturday, an endurance bike session. And we also provide support around those key sessions. So what the athlete's been provided here is some specific key advice on how best to approach that bike session, you know, how to fuel it appropriately. And that really kind of impacts how they go about their week. So general guidance on ingraining good habits, and then picking out key sessions like that Saturday endurance to really support an athlete in understanding how they go about fueling that. And what we find over time is that athletes would often send us photos of how they're getting on, or meals that they've made. And this athlete really quickly made some, you know, really positive changes. So where initially they started out by consuming a lot of processed meats and cheeses and things, You know, with this support, within a week or so, you know, we were really seeing a lot more colour, a lot more nutrient kind of density in their diet. And, you know, this was really positive things that we'd see. And ultimately this supports their goal of some weight loss, which we've achieved over time. So the next package that we have available is what we call the Elite Nutrition Coaching Package. So we offer 2 coaching packages, and this is the second of the 2. And this is an enhanced level of support. So this is where we will offer you complete periodized nutrition, often with athletes with the aim of supporting, you know, optimizing body composition. But ultimately for us, we want to ensure with this package that you're absolutely as prepared as you can be when race day comes around. So by doing this, we provide you with that periodized nutrition on a daily basis to support you getting the absolute kind of most out of your training, and also supporting you in any goals of improved body composition, ensuring that we can support race preparation and so on. And you'll see the price there is the £180 a month for this. And I'll take you through briefly what that kind of periodized nutrition looks like. So this is very much a kind of behind the scenes image, if you like. So this is how we'd go about mapping out your week, kind of using this traffic light system. So because we use Training Peaks, we can see what your coach has put into your training plan. And we use that training plan to map out where those kind of carbohydrate and energy requirements are. So where do we kind of have an opportunity to maybe look at manipulating carbohydrate and use kind of lower carbohydrate sessions? And then where do we need to kind of refuel, and also how much? So that's very much what you can see here. So if you look at the Monday as an example, on Monday, we've got a 60-minute easy run, and also a 8x4 minute big gear bike session at 100% FTP. So from working with this athlete, we'd know that they typically do that run first thing in the morning, and that bike session would typically come in the evening. So we know that we've got a low carbohydrate demand for the run. That's something that athlete could indeed do fasted, or certainly in a low carbohydrate state. So that's that breakfast, that's that kind of lower demand. Although after that session, we need to think about what's coming next. So we need to ensure that we refuel. Okay, so after session 1, we've got that medium amount of carbohydrate going in, a medium carbohydrate lunch, and then really looking at going into that kind of big gear session, we're going to have a medium amount of carbohydrate and a snack beforehand, and then to really ensure that we refuel well after that session so that we're ready for that 3K pace interval run the following morning on the Tuesday. We're going to really refuel from that big gear session with a high carbohydrate meal. And you can see how that kind of maps out through the week. So as I said, this is very much what goes on behind the scenes, if you like, and we then deliver this information to you in Training Peaks. So in terms of how we work with this elite package, it kind of falls into 2 kind of distinct phases. So the first phase varies in length depending on kind of the athlete that we're working with, but typically it's kind of between 3 and 6 weeks or so. And in this period, we begin by establishing the athlete's goals, and we begin to kind of look at their kind of normal patterns for eating habits, eating patterns, dietary preferences, you know, when they typically train, for instance, and also what their energy expenditure is for particular sessions, for example. And alongside this is an opportunity for us to begin to, you know, ingrain some good habits that are ultimately going to enable us to be able to manipulate the carbohydrate and energy around sessions. So, for instance, we might want to ensure in this period that the athlete is taking in enough protein, so we're getting adequate protein in, on a regular basis and at the good times around training, that's well balanced through the day. And from that point, we can then start to manipulate carbohydrate and energy, which is when we get into this kind of implementation phase. And that's when we can really start to support and implement this periodized approach to nutrition around training. So with that, we can provide daily periodization targets, also energy targets if that's appropriate. And we will we provide guides and suggestions of food that an athlete might have to achieve both of those kind of targets that have been provided. So looking at training peaks, this is how that might look in terms of the week that you've got. So again, a very typical kind of week that you might see from your coach on training peaks, except you'll notice at the top of each day there's a daily nutrition plan in place. Now, this will be completely individual for every athlete. And in terms of what that nutrition plan looks like, you can see an example here. So this is for the Monday. Okay, so we've had an easy swim in the morning, and then we've got a hard big gear bike session again in the evening. So the guidance that's been provided to this athlete to support that is we're going to have a lower carbohydrate breakfast. There's no need to kind of really fuel during that swim, and we don't need to necessarily refuel to a huge extent afterwards in terms of carbohydrate specifically. Again, we can keep lunch fairly low in carbohydrate, and then we can kind of switch focus to that evening session. So before that big gear session, we can look to kind of increase the carbohydrates that we're having with a medium carbohydrate snack beforehand. And then after that session, refueling again is the key to support kind of a harder run session on the Tuesday morning. So a really high carbohydrate dinner to support refueling, support replenishing those carbohydrate, those glycogen stores that we have in our body. So to support this, we would provide athletes with suggestions around how they might achieve those particular goals. So if we look at breakfast, for instance, for this athlete, their kind of low carb amount of carbs that would be suggested would be below 40 grams for each individual low carb meal or snack. So the breakfast, for instance, might be a big bowl of Greek yogurt and mixed berries and a vegetable omelette as an example. So, this is very much, as Sam said, we're not talking about training in low energy. We're talking about manipulating when we kind of have energy and macros in terms of carbohydrates for when we really need them. So then looking at what the higher or medium and higher carbohydrate options might look like. So for the dinner, for instance, after that training, when we're really looking to refuel, we might suggest something like this spaghetti bolognese. Okay, so with the suggestions that we give, it's really important for us that, we're not expecting you to eat separately from your family. We want to support, family kind of meals. We don't want you to eat different food or, and we generally get really good feedback from athletes that, the meals that they've provided have been very family friendly. So here we might have something like spaghetti bolognese, and what we would provide to you in terms of the guidance is just the amount of spaghetti that might enable you to hit those kind of carbohydrate requirements. So in terms of what those amounts might be, if you're having a medium amount of spaghetti, that might be 120 grams. And then on this particular day for this athlete, we've got that high plus kind of refuel meal. So we're looking at 270 grams of the spaghetti to go with that bolognese. And then obviously, because we need something sweet after a meal, we might also throw in the suggestion of that chocolate chia pudding there. So, really ensuring that we can refuel our carbohydrates. We've got really good kind of protein going in there as well, and also something sweet for afterwards. So yeah, just an overview there then of the two packages. So those are the two nutrition coaching packages that we offer. So the total package is that £65 a month. You know, that's where we're looking at the individualized nutrition planning, which we put in place to support kind of everyday nutrition, with some suggestions around how you're going to fuel certain sessions, and, you know, really ensure that any guidance that you are given matches your training needs and your training requirements and supports you in whatever goals that it is that you have. And then the elite nutrition coaching is that kind of enhanced level of support where you get those daily macro targets, daily energy targets if necessary, to really support you in periodizing your nutrition around your training. And that's that £180 a month package.
Thanks, Jules. So I suppose one thing we haven't touched upon so far is what we're going to do or what can we offer in terms of leading up to a race. And when you think about, like, as triathletes, we love spending money on shiny things, but the reason that people end up effing up their race is often nutrition related. So when you see people diving in the portaloos on a run or walking or staggering, you know, it's their nutrition that's gone wrong. And if you look at the people who've completed middle or long distance racing, I'm sure they will tell you, and they've had poor experiences. And so getting the nutrition right can really make or break your race, to be honest. And, you know, it's a drop in the ocean, really, when we compare it to the amount of money we spend on race entry and travel, accommodation, a bike, like wheels, etc. You know, what we can offer in terms of that planning, that process is we put a sort of cost on that of £220. So I'll try and talk through what that means and why, you know, why we think this is so important, really. And this is the kind of, like, without going into detail on this slide necessarily, this is the process that myself and Jules will go through with an athlete. But there's key things to think about here. So we have this, like, it's a bit corporate, isn't it? But like discovery phase. You know, we want to understand all the athletes, of course, and understand what the key races are, what their experiences are of nutrition as well, of course, in races they might have done before. And then a key part of this is thinking about how we can practice and develop a strategy for the race. And we're not just talking about the day of the race or even the day before the race when we might be loading, but it could even be the 3 or 4 days before that. It could even be the week before that when we might be traveling to a race. So getting the nutrition right when we're traveling is really important. And then, you know, obviously getting the nutrition right in the race is incredibly important as well. So, you know, we look at, and this is where it comes back to working with the coach and also understanding the TTT way, if we like, is understanding and identifying key sessions that we can start to think about how we practice our carbohydrate loading or practice our you know, race morning nutrition or our in-race nutrition. And, you know, even going to the, you know, we've got to think about, for example, if we're traveling abroad, if we've, you know, practiced a carbohydrate loading strategy, are we sure that all the food that is incorporated into that strategy is actually available in the country we're traveling to? So we might, you know, we've got to think about making it simple and thinking about the, you know, the race specifics. Even, you know, as I've mentioned before about traveling, what are you going to do on the plane? What are you, you know, what's your nutritional strategy if you're traveling to the other side of the world to race? You know, all these things are really important, and nutrition plays a role in this. So, you know, this is where it comes back to this roadmap to racing ultimately. And probably now is a good time to be thinking about this. So if we've got, you know, races in June or July, as you'll have seen, we're starting to begin some of the race prep blocks now. We've been doing some more race specific sessions, for example. We're starting to run off some sessions. And 3 or 4 months is a good time to start to think about developing and practicing our carb loading strategy around key sessions. So what are we doing, the 24 or 48 hours before our race, and we need to practice that to ensure we can deal with that and we're prepared for that. What are we actually going to do on the morning? Because we're going to be nervous. We need to make sure that we're comfortable and we know exactly what we're doing from a nutrition perspective, because then it's one less thing to worry about on race morning when your nerves are all over the place. And then, most importantly, what's the in-race nutrition strategy as well? We've got to plan all these things to a T to really, and then you can execute them, and at the end of that race that you've done everything you possibly can, and you'll be proud of the achievement that you've made on that day. And part of this process is, as I said on the previous slide, is identifying these opportunities within this 3 or 4 month period now before races happen to start to practice these things, bearing in mind also what some of the specifics are for the race that we're targeting. So is it abroad? How far are we going to have to travel? What is the availability of on-course nutrition? Things like that. We can find that information out and start to think about practicing that and incorporating that into these strategies that we come up with. What we can't do is just leave this till 2 weeks before, do a couple of brick sessions where we think, I'll just shove a load of carbohydrate down and see how I feel, and then no doubt you'll do something very different on race day anyway. So this is all about just being prepared for the race, standing on the start line, knowing you've done everything possible, and you've just got to execute on the race day. And that's what, this is where we can kind of support with that. So I suppose, we've got our 3 packages, if you like. And again, I keep, I'll come back to the roadmap in a minute, but with this race specific, I suppose, package, then what we're, aiming to do is provide a guide. So when you can print this out, you can have it on your phone. So exactly the food that you need to do before race day, what times you're going to be doing that, taking into account as well when you're going to be racking your bike, for example, or the other commitments you might have to family on that day before the race. And then, thinking about race day nutrition, you've got that planned down to a T. So you know what exactly you're doing for the morning. You know how you're going to set your bike up. The food that you're going to drink and eat before and then during the bike, and then onto the run. Exactly what the plan is as well. And that means all you've got to do is turn up and execute that plan on the day, and that's going to be taken care of. And that's ultimately, when you look at professional athletes, that's what they do. They just follow the plan to a T, execute as best as possible, and trust the process. And then the result speaks for itself more often than not. So that's what that kind of package offers, if you like. So how does this, I suppose, another way, how does this all fit together? So one of the ways we work with people is we might start with the total nutrition coaching package, ingrain some of the basics, and then what we can then do leading into a race 3 to 4 months out is we can do the total nutrition coaching, maintain that weekly support around the key sessions, but some accountability, and then maybe we can also add the premium, this race specific package on top of that to make sure that we're really well and truly prepared for that. Obviously the alternative is, and we can almost graduate, if we like, you've learned the basics, you can graduate from total nutrition coaching package onto this elite package. And we understand that there's and this goes for any type of athlete really. You can make comparisons to like boxers or cyclists or whatever. Everyone's not going to be on their nutrition 12 months of the year, and you have windows of motivation, let's say, windows of time where you really need to focus your mind on your nutrition, your training leading into a race, and that's typically 12 to 16 weeks out or something like that. And as I said, you can make that comparison to a boxer, for example, who does a 12-week training camp. They're on it every day, getting the nutrition right, getting the training done, and that's that window of time where they're really executing everything to a T to get them in the best shape possible to do, you know, to fight well. And you know, that mirrors what we're trying to do here. You know, as athletes, we're all trying to do our best come race day, and you know, this is, I suppose, a couple of options from a nutritional perspective as to how that can be achieved. And ultimately, we want everyone, you know, to stand on that start line. I know I want to stand on the start line when I'm racing, knowing I've done everything I possibly can, and that includes training and nutrition and everything else that comes with that, to execute that race. And that's all I've got to do, just turn up, execute, and everything else will take care of itself. So I suppose that's covered the principles that we work to, and then kind of what we offer as a company. So yeah, granted, it was a little bit of a sales pitch, but hopefully you've taken some bits from that as well, as to how, you know, there's bits on the carbohydrate or energy availability or periodization that you can also start to think about potentially implementing into your own training, and obviously we can support with that as well through our various packages. But of course, we're happy to kind of take questions now. Yeah, if you would like to contact us, and obviously our emails are on screen, I'll leave those up, and you can also go on our website or WhatsApp or whatever it is that you want to choose to contact us. Yeah, so if anyone's got any questions at this point in time, then I'll be happy to answer those, or Jules will be happy to answer those. Silence. It's clear to everyone, and everyone's starving.
Hi.
Oh, hi Shirley.
Hiya. I'm a sprint triathlete. Yeah. So I was thinking, is it necessary? I'd like to lose weight and just achieve faster times, and it would be interesting for me, and I'd like to get into this, but I'm thinking, obviously I don't need all that endurance and carbs. Maximum, so probably an hour and a half, isn't it, the race? So
it is, but you're at the, yeah, if you're performing, you know, if you're racing a sprint, then the dependency on carbohydrate is very high, and to improve as an athlete and get the most from your training, you can still, you know, optimize the amount of carbohydrate that you have leading into certain sessions. But if you're saying you want to lose weight as well, and bring yourself down to a, you know, optimal race weight, then using the periodized approach will work just as well. Yeah, I touched upon, you know, middle to long distance racing there, and I suppose that's where the focus was for today, but the principles still apply. You know, we know that these principles still apply for like sprint or Olympic distance. So a lot of these principles are used, you know, by the Brownlees, for example, Georgia Taylor Brown, people like that at British Tri. So there's still, you know, crossover, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Thanks.
Did anyone else have any questions at this stage? Obviously, feel free to drop us a message or an email if there's any questions that come from tonight, or you're interested in working with us, or, you know, it could be absolutely anything. Chan, I can see you waving a banana.
I've got one question actually.
Oh,
don't mind.
Go on, Kieran. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how much do you get involved in the micronutrients side of things? Yeah.
So, the way we typically work, we do maybe like 5 to 7 days of nutrition tracking using MyFitnessPal, and then the information that we get from that, we put into a different software called Nutritics, and that gives us an overview of all the macros, but also the micronutrients. So if there's any, obvious deficiencies in the diet, then we can pick up on those and advise accordingly as well. Of course, yes, micronutrients are.
So is that the same micronutrients that MyFitnessPal has in it itself? So you basically taking the same data as that, or does it somehow collect additional data?
So we can collect additional data. The ones in MyFitnessPal are limited.
Yeah.
The foods, we enter those foods into another database essentially. So it's a bit of time, but we've got a good system for doing that. And then it tells us the micronutrients, because MyFitnessPal only picks up like 3 or 4, generally speaking. We would do that.
What difference do you see on performance for people that are when they're focused on things like nutritional intake, like the micronutritional intake of macros is relatively, I'm careful how I say it, but to me it's relatively obvious, most of it, but the micronutrients is an absolute another world, in terms of how that affects performance, and the even the effects of things like bicarb on performance, things like that. Like, do you ever get into that level of detail?
Yeah, so there's certainly, especially with the polarized sort of training approach that TTT have, you'll know we're doing a lot of like really hard, high intensity bike sessions or run sessions, for example, and there's absolutely use for specific supplements or agents, let's say, that can support high intensity sessions. So for example, things like beetroot juice or tart cherry juice, things like that. Sodium bicarb, used appropriately around those high intensity sessions, then absolutely there's a role for those. And as I said, looking in the diet and looking at what people's micronutrient intake is really important as well, because they often, for example, iron is, and Jules will probably can talk a little bit more about that from her expertise in the sort of female domain, let's say. And the number of people that have low iron intake is quite surprising, to be honest. Things like omega-3s, so many people don't take in enough omega-3, and we know that omega-3 actually supports recovery and muscle function. So yes, there's certainly, we need to look at those things to understand, because they understand the levels that you're taking in the diet, because they work in synergy, if you like, with the macronutrients to then optimize these, performance, training, adaptations, etc. So yes, absolutely, we would look at those as well, because they're critical. Hopefully
I'm assuming that means you just suggest foods that if you're lacking in certain areas, you go, actually you need a bit more of this, therefore take more of this food, and that would increase that.
Yeah, so going back to iron's a really good example, because people would potentially just think, right, well, I'm iron deficient, therefore I need to eat a load of red meat. But if you have that red meat with a load of vegetables, then quite often the iron is uptake is actually lower. So you can think about, actually, we might maybe need to think about other things that support iron uptake, like vitamin C, for example, at the same time. So there's all those interactions to kind of consider.
Cool, thanks.
Question.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about food intake, pre-match, pre-race fueling and post-race fueling and things. There seems to be very little about fluid regulation during the race, or even pre and post race. I mean, some school of thought saying that you should hydrate more than you need, and some would say, well, use isotonic. Some say use whatever that makes you quench your thirst. And so my question is, there's 2 questions really. How do you fuel yourself during race efficiently? And is there any way to manipulate your hydration to enhance your training, load and things? Is that something that people look into?
Yeah, so I suppose to take your second question first,
because I find it very difficult to eat something when I'm really, trying to climb. The last time bike got a bit, sticky, and then I actually fell while trying to eat a flapjack.
Oh wow!
And I noticed that it's not entirely the flapjack fault. It's actually the wind and the pothole, and the bike handlebar was a bit squeaky. I had it serviced, no problem since.
Yeah, so manipulating hydration to maximize the training is basically be hydrated, because otherwise your training will suffer and therefore the adaptation will be less, if that makes sense. So
would you intentionally dehydrate yourself just to get a load out?
No, definitely not, because so if you entered a session dehydrated, then the amount of work that you could actually do during that session would be lower, and therefore the training benefit would be lower from that session, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just my personal experience. Once I got on the bike and forgot my bottle.
Yeah.
And accidentally discovered that my Garmin computer told me it's very high load in that session for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
So I may not have gone to a state of dehydration then, but it seems to, well, the computer is telling me something. That should I be paying attention to that or not?
Yeah, definitely. It's so important to hydrate, especially during turbo sessions. Turbo sessions are the worst for hydration, because you're not moving and you don't necessarily take note of what you're doing from a hydration perspective. But it's really a good opportunity to practice or getting into a habit of drinking regularly. So yes, you should, I suppose, definitely take note of your Garmin if it's telling you it's going to be a big session and you need to hydrate appropriately. And that means starting that session well hydrated and then continuing that during the session. So, if you, for example, if you end up doing a long ride, sweat, and you're a heavy sweater, and you don't take on adequate fluid, then for the rest of the day, you're just going to be really thirsty and you're just playing catch up essentially. And that's what we don't want to do. And that's why we, like, even with the carbohydrate periodization, it's very careful, because you never want to be trying to play catch up with your body, because it's not, maybe the next session's okay, but then it's the subsequent sessions that you just, it's like a downward spiral in many ways, because you can't catch up. And it's the same principle with the hydration as well.
So during race is no different.
Oh no, during race, I mean, that's critical, isn't it? The day before we need to be well hydrated. The morning of, we also need to be well hydrated. And that's a critical part of the plan as well. When we come to a race, is how many carbs, are we going to drink the carbs and therefore hydrate to a certain extent at the same time? Or are we going to have a separate bottle just for our electrolytes? We might have, a drinks bottle for carbs. When are we going to, which bottles are we going to pick up? Are we going to pick up electrolytes on the way around, or just water? Or, there's all these things to consider. But unless you've planned, then that's when it starts to, particularly when we go to 70.3 and Ironman racing, that's when it starts to fall apart, because you get onto the run and you're in all sorts of trouble. You're cramping up and whatever. So yeah, it's critical, really.
So the message that I get is you should hydrate yourself properly during training, and also don't do anything different on a race day. Just carry on. That's
exactly right. Yeah, and that's what we really try and push, is that you create these habits in training, because when it comes to a race, then you just do it automatically. It could be as simple as, you have an alarm on your Garmin or something, and it just goes off every 10 minutes, and you just take 2 sips of your drink, and you do that in training. And then when you come to do a race, it's just second nature. It's well ingrained, and that's the point, really. And that's the same with the carbs intake and things like that as well. So
got it. Yeah. So I'll ignore the Garmin and start thinking about these now.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Cool. Has anyone else got any questions at this stage?
I've got one. Sorry, hopefully off the back of that. Sorry, it's me again. So something I find is that I tend, when I get don't know if this is the right way. I probably learned this from somewhere that probably isn't necessarily true, but basically you hydrate based on what your wee looks like, basically. So if it's different on the color, you can tell how hydrated you are. Therefore, if it tells you need to drink more, you drink more. That's kind of one philosophy, but it means that I end up basically drinking 4 or 5 liters a day. Now that keeps me hydrated, but then I find that it actually affects my sleep, and I don't sleep as well. Whereas if I drink less, I tend to sleep better, because obviously I've not obviously got a full bladder or anything like that. It's getting very, very personal, too much information here, isn't it? But I guess it's quite important, because actually, where I'm benefiting from the hydration, I'm losing out on sleep. So it's actually affecting the quality of the sleep. Any thoughts on that? Or so my question actually is it can you overhydrate early in the day and then almost stop hydrating later on to kind of, does it still have the same benefit? Or is it like protein, where you've got to keep it, the consistency is the important part?
Do you want me to go, Jules, or are you going?
No, you carry on.
All right. I'd say
you were gonna.
I was just thinking, yeah. I wouldn't suggest necking 3 liters, when you wake up and then that's it for the day. Or, let's say, for example, I think it's more about if what's in the, it could just be as simple as including some electrolytes in that drink to ensure the absorption's good. And therefore it might limit the impact on your sleep as well. It's always a balance, isn't it? You don't want to be impacting your recovery. And if you're drinking 4 or 5 liters in a day, I mean, that's pretty good. Going back to your other point, you can certainly overhydrate. And so that's not that uncommon in some like long distance races. And that's where the kind of guidance is to drink to, or come from, to drink to thirst in many ways. I mean, you've got to be on top of that and understand your body and being in tune with that. But people used to think that if you you just need to really hydrate without the sodium, then you become hyponatremic and have all sorts of issues essentially. So it's just about finding the balance, and you could maybe cut that down to 3 or 4 liters, and then you see how you sleep based on that. Or it could be.
I've tried to swap different ways. I tend to use like my Garmin Connect. It kind of tells you how much you need. So I've tried to keep close to that as well. But or the balance between one of those two, I use as an indicator. But it's it always seems to affect it. So okay.
It's just about
testing things. Then is the answer.
Testing things. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Nutrition is very individual. As we're working out, so what works for one person doesn't always work for another. So there is a bit of trial and error as well with it. Yeah. Sorry, Chan, go.
Sorry, it's me. I once, actually twice, came into a pair of scientists who actually do different tonic strength for drinks, and they said the amount of sweat you lose is determined genetically. So they have 9 different strengths of fluid, and they actually test people's sweats on site and see how much sweat you're losing. Yeah. What's your experience on that? Do you know anybody doing that who drank a constant kind of a concentration of fluid all the time, or does it help any athlete that benefit from that? Or?
Yeah, me. Precision hydration is the guys that we've used with TTT before. They do sweat testing, and that tells you the concentration. Most they have like super strength electrolytes, because a lot of people, the concentration of their sweat is much higher than what you can replace with like high 5 or SIS tablets, for example. So they do like super strength like tablets. So if you're a very salty sweater, then that might be something to consider looking at. Phil will be able to, or Tony might be able to tell us whether there's still a link or discount opportunities with precision hydration. There used to be, but I can't recall whether that's still the case. But those guys are like really, the guys I'd always turn to and point people towards. Certainly.
You feel the benefit then?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I was personally, I was a fairly heavy sweater and cramped off the bike quite a few times, and then that sort of, I kind of rid of that issue just by increasing the concentration of we're basically using the super strength tablets from those guys when it came to racing, and in certain turbo sessions that get a bit sweaty as well, let's say.
So do you use that just as a supplement or just general for your personalized fluid?
It's just like the effervescent tablets that you put into your water, but they're just super strength.
So you use it during the workout, and you don't drink it normally.
Before the workout or during the workout, depends really on what I'm going to be doing, and whether drinking is going to be if there's an opportunity to drink during that workout, for example. Yeah.
Chan, just have a chat to your coach over the next day or so, because we have put some general sweat testing sessions that we're looking at in the next block of training. So you might find that gets built into your program, or ask your coach anyway about it. They'll know about it.
Right. Thanks.
Okay.
Cheers, Tony. Cool. Right. If there's no more questions, everyone's heard me and Jules speak for long enough now. An hour and 10 minutes. Everyone's starving. I know I am. But yeah, thanks very much for logging on tonight and listening to us chat. I suppose the only thing to say is if you want any more information, or if you've got any questions, then just feel free to drop us a message or emails, or just chat to your coach and they can direct you to us. Sorry. But yeah, hopefully everyone has a good rest of the training week. Thanks very much.
Superb. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you. Cheers,
Cheers,
Jules. Cheers, Sam.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for logging in, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Just checking Phil's. Phil, yeah, is recording. Yeah.
Yeah, Phil's recording. Yeah.
Do you want me to message him and tell him he can stop recording?
Just gonna do it.
All right. Okay.